You're listening to the Alex Wolf Podcast. Interesting conversations about innovation, economics, culture, and history for the independent thinkers and curious minds. I'm your host, Alex Wolf. Hi, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Alex Wolf Podcast. This week, I wanted to talk about the feminine influence in human-friendly technology. What the hell does that even mean? Well, I first want to start off this episode by saying this is not about how women are better in tech. This is not about me saying that everything women invent is the best. So I'm just doing this disclaimer of, making sure I'm not claiming superiority, because I genuinely don't think that one gender is superior to the next. So I'm just laying that out. This is an episode that's going to touch upon certain patterns that you can trace in many inventions and products built by women. And so it's really, again, not about, competition. Men have invented amazing things. It's really about seeing the differences that certain perspectives have and loving those differences. And also keep in mind, an invention can have feminine influence and be made by someone who is not a woman. Femininity is an energy, it's not a gender, right? So, anyway, what I love about this topic is that I didn't even try to find this pattern. It kind of revealed itself to me, and it did that as I was putting together my presentation on the 4 qualifiers of what I call human friendly technology. I have a presentation about it on my YouTube channel. I will link to it. And I reference to it a lot because it's a question I get asked almost every day. Like, Alex, what do you think, you know, um, quote unquote good technology looks like, or what kind of technology should we be building? And I break it down in that video. But when I was doing my research together and theorizing what particular features must a human friendly piece of technology have, what I realized is most of the examples that agreed to some of what I was theorizing happened to be made by women. So again, I wasn't looking for this. It's just that as I was looking for these particular features, a lot of those features you could see were, invented by women. So there's 2 that stick out in particular that I want to talk about in this episode. And they both embody 2 principles of feminine influence that I think, again, embody this pattern that I'm talking about. So the first is the invention by Joanna Montgomery. She invented a smart pillow hardware. And basically, how it works is it's for long distance couples, and you wear a wristband, and when the other person wears the wristband, you can hear the heartbeat of the person. It signals out the heartbeat to the other person, and it uses Wi-Fi, so this can happen anywhere in the world as long as there's Wi-Fi. And again, this was originally invented for long distance relationships. And I feel like the general feedback I get when I talk about this is either people are kind of creeped out, like, ugh, that's a little too much. But for people who are actually in long distance relationships, they really see the value of something like that, because intimacy is a form of closeness, and one of the very definitions of closeness is physical proximity. Okay? Literally being close to someone, literally sharing space with someone. Now, it is true that you can be in the physical space of someone and not feel close to them, But in most of our relationships, particularly our intimate ones, proximity is a big deal. That's why there's so much negative connotation about long distance relationships not working. Why? It's usually because y'all are not in the same physical space. Okay, so why is this relevant? Um, because the feature I was highlighting in this particular invention that I deem to be human friendly is presence. And presence is the feeling that someone is in the room with you. Presence is the feeling of being seen or being heard. It is different than attention, in my opinion. Attention is kind of being watched. Presence is someone really seeing beyond just the surface of who you are, but it's someone who has this close intimacy with you. When I did the episode about how will you measure your life, it was a question I proposed, basically kind of stimulating thoughts around, we tend to measure life in status and trophies and awards. But it's really about like, maybe we should measure our lives using a different unit of measurement. And I was on a Clubhouse conversation, and the moderator had asked me, how would I measure my life? And, I don't have a cookie cutter answer, but I would say it would have to align with the moments of intimacy in my life. Meaning just feeling close to my loved ones, having those moments where you really feel close to your parents or you feel close to your brothers or sisters. Those really, they're not grand moments. They're not necessarily the graduations and the weddings and the big celebrations. They could just be, baking in the kitchen. They could just be going for a drive or like walking in Target, right? Those moments of closeness to me, and I think to all of us, really are a great unit of measurement as far as like, I've been given this life. How do I make it feel really worthy? How do I make it feel like, yeah, I sunk my teeth in to this human experience? It's mostly going to happen through feeling close to people. And what's so cool about intimacy is that you can feel it with people that you know very well, and you can also feel it with strangers, in the sense that you might bond with someone over music, or you might see someone in the street and have a very pure moment of compassion. Maybe you help someone from slipping, or maybe you just give someone a look. In New York, that happens all the time. You might be on the train, you give someone's acting crazy, you give someone a look. That is an opportunity to feel closeness. And it's one of the most pure human experiences you can have. And unfortunately, because of the circumstances we're in and how isolated we've been, I'm sure that has decreased. I don't know if y'all saw in the news, but apparently life expectancy has decreased by 1 year this year. And of course, a lot of that is part of that has been contributed just by the overall pandemic and just the isolation as well. And people don't realize that loneliness is a severe health threat. It's not just an emotion, it is something that can shorten your lifespan. It is something that can turn your health into something that's very frail, because we are a very social species. Okay. And so, why am I talking about this? What does this have to do with presence? Well, obviously everything, because the way that we don't feel lonely is through having present moments with people. Either you being very present and listening to them, or vice versa. And the other great thing about presence is that it's a passive experience most of the time, meaning that it's not really an act of doing, and it's hardly an act at all. It is being, right? Being in the room with someone, you feel a difference. I was just on a call with two of my good friends who are in tech, and we kind of meet up every month now when we just kind of like dish out the scoop on what we think is going on. And they're amazing women. And we were talking about how, all three of us have experienced virtual co-working with like friends and family, meaning, being on FaceTime or Zoom or whatever with friends and family and not even saying anything, but just having them online, right? And how it makes you feel like someone is present with you in the room. Wow. Okay, that is a big deal. That is a really big deal when we are talking about human friendly technology. Because, as I've already explained, we are a social species. We need to feel present with others. We don't really do well with a bunch of attention, right? People get it confused. A lot of what you see today when people are trying to become famous and fill a void of loneliness with fame, they are sticking, a square peg in a round hole because that is not going to make you feel less lonely. It will actually aggravate your loneliness and isolate you further because what fame does, it tends to objectify, which means you feel like an object, which is very dehumanizing. And you will find that it is even harder for people to be present with you because they no longer interpret you as an emotional human being, but now as this symbol of status. And you tend to attract, people who are trying to get some kind of gain from that and could care less about who you really are. So, back to this long distance pillow. One of the themes I've noticed in feminine influence is that in technology is that presence is thought about. Um, I, I don't think it's impossible that a man would ever come up with this invention, but in my experience in being in the tech world and seeing many different people and personalities, it would be rare to see this type of invention. And it makes just a lot of sense why a woman would invent this. And again, it's less about the gender, it's really more about the perspective and the feminine energy, and how I'll be explaining in a little bit how it's a receptive energy, it's a passive energy, which sometimes gets interpreted as like a bad thing. It's like in our culture, because we're so active and because we're so, again, yeah, just kind of proactive, we don't really see the value in passiveness. We see passiveness as weakness. But what I'm trying to explain here is that an invention like this smart pillow, which enhances a passive behavior, which is just being with someone, it's not actively doing anything. It's doing what you would be doing if you were in the physical space together, which is breathing, right? What it's doing is it's a receptor. It's picking up signals in its environment. And that in itself is a representation of feminine energy, because when we're talking about yin and yang, yang is the active, proactive, um, it's about expansiveness. It's about going out and, trying to it's about sending a message out, where the yin, feminine aspect is more about receiving things and picking up signals. It's a sponge, it picks up things. And so we'll be talking about that in a little bit. But wow, I could not think of a better example. Now, what's so beautiful and validating about this type of technology is that it goes beyond just helping long distance couples feel closer. But what Joanna did, and she's amazing, and we, are acquainted with each other, and she's just a brilliant person. She decided to get these pillows into children's hospitals, okay? And they have conducted enough research at this point that proves that these pillows are helping children who do not have the privilege of being close to their loved ones while in the hospital, which we know is not the most comfortable place, especially as a child, in using these pillows, they have scientific research that shows that they are dealing with their treatments easier, with more ease. You know what I mean? They're healing with more ease because the literal technological extension of presence that this invention provides is so human friendly that it is healing children, okay, at a massive scale. That is the feminine influence in technology. It is one that is thinking about how to enhance our already organic nature, right? It's not about over manipulating our nature. I have an episode about finding our nature in things and how destructive it is to over manipulate the organic pattern or structure of things, okay? We as human beings, we already have an inherent intelligence that keeps us alive and healthy and thriving. And the point is, we want to build technology that enhances these behaviors, such as the feeling of presence, so that, one of the things I say is that no technology can make life perfect, but it can only make life worth it. There will never be a magic pill that gets rid of everything we hate, yet, right now, there are many people who are trying to invent that. In my tech philosophy, that is a waste of time. I'm more interested in how do we build things that make life worth it. So it's unfortunate that these children are in the hospital to begin with, right? But I don't think we can effectively help them by trying to get rid of every bad thing in the world as much as we can work with the circumstances we have, as unfortunate as they may be at times, and figure out ways that are providing healing in a more, I want to say, like, speedy way. Because a lot of the times when we're talking about big VC startups and these big medical and space startups that have these grand visions of colonizing Mars and, having immortality, which is two things that are actively being invested in right now, that is time and energy that can be spent on supporting the worthiness of life for people who are not feeling like life is worth it right now. I also recently posted on Instagram about, unfortunately, another TikTok star, has taken their life, very young person, young girl. And in my Amazon bookstore, y'all, I have a great section. I think it's in the sociology section. I will link it. There is a book called iGen that I found a few years ago, and it has, pretty jarring data about how young people, when exposed to harmful social media, want to harm themselves. And that honestly was the reason why I decided to do this presentation about human friendly technology to begin with, because in my eyes, this is literally a matter of life and death. And the reason why I'm interested in tech philosophy is because philosophy is about asking the the question of existence. It's about asking about the nature of existence and really trying to define what makes life worth living. And I have to throw technology in there because most of the time, especially when we're talking about young people, it is the technology that is interfering with what they feel to be like a life that is worth it. Okay? So this is what I'm here to do. I'm here to have conversations about, hey, what makes life worth it for you? And let's look in the direction of nature, right? You can see that is a reoccurring theme in my work is slowing things down, getting in touch with nature, seeing yourself as a part of nature, not separate from it. So Joanna Montgomery is great. Her company is called Little Riot. You can check it out. And again, I compiled the research and she stuck out, and it just so happened that she is a woman. And so that's one of the greatest examples. Presence is very important. we're living in a world where people are not listening to each other. That is very clear. We all have a lot to say, but very few of us have the privilege of being heard. And, it's just, it's a real crappy situation because I think that some of the biggest, most complicated problems really have the most simple solution. And most of our social, quote unquote, social media, very little communication is being done at all. I had a good year where I just was not having it as far as the term social media. I was like, you will not call that social media to me. I will not call it social media. I gave in and it is what it is. But the reason why was because I was really adamant about pointing out that what's going on here is, it might technically be social, but it is not effective communication, and how important it is to have presence in effective communication. And how ironic it is that these social platforms that are, designed to communicate have been mostly designed by people who are notoriously known for having social kind of deprivations. Like they have communication problems. They were not necessarily the most advanced in knowing how to communicate, and that is part of why they got involved in building this technology to begin with. So that is one aspect I think that sticks out as far as feminine influence. It is the passive aspect. It is the presence, actually more than the passive, of making people using the power of the internet. Okay, very few telecommunications, just a little etymology there. Tele means distant, okay? So when we talk about the telephone, phone means to hear. You're talking about headphones and earphones. Phone, phonic, that comes from, ancient, whatever. I don't even know what language, probably like Latin or something. It means to hear. Saxophone, things like that. So you got your telephone, distant hearing. I can hear you at a distance. Then you have, the television. That gets even crazier because now you can see at a distance, okay? There are very few telecommunications that allow the experience of presence in the sense where both parties can be actively present at a right, at a distance. The phone, the telephone is one of them because when you are on the phone with someone or you are FaceTiming someone, you are both presently active. And I'm saying that to say that we have built the internet, which has this present capability technologically, but it is not leveraged that much. I guess you can argue this year we've used it more because of the pandemic, but for the most part, we communicate without the presence and we build relationships without presence in our conversations. And that fragmentation is very apparent in the fragmentation of people and their relationships with people and them misunderstanding and being left to decrypt the almost impossible messages in communications that don't have presence. Okay. So I think that this pillow is a great beacon of light in the sense that it is an example of what social media could look like. I mean, technically speaking, it could be considered a social media because it is social and it is a medium of being social in the sense that you are having this experience with another human being that satisfies your survival need of socialization, okay? It's a stretch, but I think I like to be very literal about the terms I use because it helps us stay on track of what the hell we're actually talking about here, okay? So it's fun to think about. Media is the plural for medium. So, you know, social media, it does not have to look like a like button and all these other things. Okay, so the other one that sticks out, the story of feminine influence in tech that sticks out, mind you, there's dozens, there's hundreds. You just kind of have to do your research and go back in history. But I felt these two were relevant and also recent. So the other one is the Etsy story. And the long story short is that the one of the founders of Flickr had, I guess, come across someone who had the idea for Etsy, and she was trying to raise funding for it, and no one saw why it would be lucrative. And the biggest complaint is, first of all, that, who would want soap made from a grandma in Peoria, Illinois, or something like that? And then, secondly, how is that scalable, right? How can you get that one grandma to make a million soaps? Well, the whole point of the business model is, okay, again, this emphasis on intimacy. The way thoughtful shopping is done, particularly thoughtful shopping happens mostly by women, meaning that when we're talking about gifts, when we're talking about buying for, the art of gifting, there is a whole art of gifting that I think is being lost, in which you really tune into the interests of whoever you are gifting to, and you find a very unique thing to give them. And that is a very important gesture in socializing. It is a very important gesture in bonding and intimacy, because you know that people who have gifted you something special has had a pretty prominent impact, and maybe you gifted something, and it doesn't have to be a car. It could be a soap made by grandma in Peoria in the right context. So, um, you know, as I was listening to the story, and I will link to the podcast about this episode with Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of LinkedIn, and who he himself admits he did not see the value of Etsy. And, let's be honest, that happens all the time in Silicon Valley. There's plenty of businesses, both by men and women, that, people don't see what's lucrative about it. And the next thing you know, it's the next Uber, right? But what stands out in this particular case is that they did not see two things that I think were obviously lucrative, and it was because of a bias and not understanding, how a lot of women shop, you know, and the people who missed out, that sucks, but. Here's what Etsy does really great, and to this day is thriving. I think this year they did more than ever before because so many people bought masks off Etsy. It can actually scale intimacy, which is almost impossible. So let's talk about that for a second. Digital intimacy is a sacred thing, in my opinion, because most social media is using advertisements in between our conversations to be able to kind of host or subsidize this conversation, meaning that, you post a picture, I post a picture, and in between our picture, there's an ad. And this ad is acting as the monetary, again, subsidy so that you and I can both upload and hopefully see each other's posts. Now, in my video about Snapchat and Facebook, I talked about how one of the issues Snapchat had in the beginning, part of why that platform thrived in the start was because it was a very intimate platform. Not only was it intimate because people were sending, little risque pictures, but it was intimate because the overall design of the platform made it so that you were most likely using it with people you were close to or really cared about seeing. There was a higher kind of bar to entry as far as like who you were going to follow or who you were going to send a message to. It was inherently just way more private and intimate than your experience on Instagram. Instagram feels like a stage, right? Whereas when you went to Snapchat, it felt like your own little world. If you still use Snapchat, it doesn't feel like everyone's watching you. Whereas Instagram, it feels like any gesture you make is watched. So, part of the problem Snapchat came came up to was as they got all these users, of course, their idea of monetizing was going to be having advertisements like everyone else, but they knew that putting in those advertisements would threaten the intimacy. Okay. And the moral of this story is that it is very difficult to feel digital intimacy with ads. They kind of kill the vibe, if you know what I mean. Like, they kind of take something from feeling, you know, potentially emotional and sincere and close to all of a sudden interrupted, right? It can feel very interrupted. And if you know and if you expect that interruption, you will, kind of condition yourself to not be as relaxed. You know that this is a place for that. And it affects the overall behavior. So they were really challenged because they knew their biggest asset was this intimacy, but they also knew that the only way they could realistically keep this company alive was through selling ads. And so they had to come up with very intricate ways to incorporate the ads, meaning that it wasn't just, you sign up like Facebook and you could be a Joe Schmo and buy an ad off of Snapchat. I think that it's a little easier to do that now, but as they were building up, you had to be an already, pretty much huge brand, and you had to get specifically consulted by them and generate a campaign with them. And they had lots of requirements as far as, how it needed to look. It needed to be vertical video. That was like very jarring for a lot of agencies. And what I say in the video is that they had, you know, something like they had scalable capital, but they didn't have, it was unscalable work. Intimacy is very hard to scale because the whole essence of intimacy is that it is not something that can be mass produced. Okay? So, what Etsy provides is it provides a scale through its marketplace to produce things that are one of a kind. That is what I call genius. That is very much a feminine influence because to me, when we see feminine influence in technology, intimacy will be prioritized. Products will be designed around intimacy, and because the feminine influence understands how much of an asset that intimacy plays in the user experience. Okay? If you look around, most of our platforms don't prioritize that. Okay? So the fact that, Etsy had to happen. We have eBay, which is similar in the sense that it's a marketplace where you can buy one of a kind things, but they're auctioned. And most of the time, they're resold. They're objects that have already existed and are in a resale market. Etsy is about craft. It allows craft to thrive, which is very hard in a mass producing capitalistic infrastructure. But it is such a demand. It is such a legitimate market of people who want one of a kind crafty things. Okay? That is the feminine influence in tech. And so to hear this story about how, just the idea that there were enough people who could have helped, who had the means to invest, but could not understand why someone would want that soap. I'm about to go online and buy that soap right now, because again, we live in a world where things are so mass produced that you could be in New Jersey, Florida, LA, and go to the same store and literally the layout is the same and the soaps are the same. Um, and that is a very big threat to someone who hands makes soaps. Who, and the soaps are, keep in mind, probably has less harmful ingredients and actually supports the local economy of that person. I'm not saying Etsy is perfect. I'm sure some people aren't happy with whatever their commission, but honestly, I don't hear much of that. Like, how much they take off the top. So, I don't know. I felt for her as I was listening to this story, because in my experience, when I present these things, I have a very similar response. And, I don't think it's, I don't like to victimize myself when it comes to this. It's just about like kind of acknowledging, the differences again in a feminine influence, and how different, those products and things can look like. And just the inherent kind of like higher emotional intelligence I will see in these products, and how they really are catered to, again, yes, this more emotional body within us, and not just, who we are as consumers, but also as like, when you think about the attention economy, it is very much focused on exploiting the physiology and not so much about appealing to your humanity, right? Whereas these two examples really stick out. Okay. So, yes, that's what I wanted to say. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the passive and the active in technology, and presence and absence. Okay. Very important principles in life. And those principles get expressed through our technology. So, as I was saying, feminine influence tends to be more passive than active, and more present than absent. Most of the technology that we use to communicate, we can both be absent technically, meaning that you don't have to be there and I don't have to be there. And there's advantages to that. There's a lot of advantages. But what I always say is that when that's the primary way of communicating, you're going to have a huge liability to the fabric of society, because that's not how we've been designed to communicate. Okay. Most of our technology, again, is designed for us where we don't have to be both parties don't have to be physically present. And then it's also designed to be very active, meaning proactive, meaning an active point of view, for example, thinks we have to go out into space to learn about space, right? That's very true. But a passive point of view understands where we are, as we are already in outer space, okay? And we could learn just as much, if not more, about space by not building things that go out into space, but by building instruments of sensitivity that pick up signals from space, okay? Which we have some of those. But the point is, it is less abrasive, okay? It is less about going out and, being abrasive and figuring out the world by breaking it up and cutting it up, which is mostly what science is. It's literally cutting things up and looking at them under microscopes, okay? the feminine influence is trying to pick up the signal. It is not trying to send it out. Okay. It understands. It is less. Yeah. I feel like the feminine influence already sees itself as a center and can better, again, like learn or provide or contribute to wellness by being sensitive. Whereas, I guess you could say that the masculine influence is like it does not necessarily see itself as a center. Or if it does, it feels like it can't really accomplish much as a center, that it must leave its center. And so I think we have a lot of fatigue with that style just because that seems to be what we use the most. But I do think there is advantages in wanting to be expansive and go out. But we are at an overload with that right now. And it has gotten to a point where we are getting rid of, what makes us human. We are extracting, our humanity in a lot of ways by over manipulating our nature or just going in one direction and not the other. So, I'm very interested in this type of topic. There are plenty of women, hundreds, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of women in technology. It is not a rare thing. I think there's a narrative that it's rare, but it's really not. Part of the first computer science technology was advanced by Ada Lovelace. You might want to look into her if you don't know about her. And her expertise in computer science and math was largely inspired by love. She was in love with someone, and they, basically use the medium of math to communicate their love. And that's a very important piece of context because, again, there's this emotional involvement and emotional appeal involved. And that hopefully, isn't seen as something that is inferior, but something that's very human and beautiful and romantic. We also have like Hedy Lamarr, who's another like famous, iconic technologist, and you know, it's just very interesting to think about. Again, I didn't find this pattern. I didn't go looking for this pattern. This pattern revealed itself to me, and I hope that people, I hope that people just kind of can trace it now and see that pattern a little bit more, and see how lucrative it is, and I think how important it is for right now. But yes, there we can build our technology not to just be proactive, but to be passive, to pick up. You think of like a radio, you think of your skin, right? Your skin doesn't really do anything but receive signals. It definitely like sweats and stuff, and it lets stuff out, but its power is in its sensitivity and how it's picking that up, right? So we can build technology that does that, and we can possibly learn more about our world and build more human friendly technology by building, um, you know, like some type of receiving tech, and again offer these chances for people to feel connected more connected, like those children and those long distance relationships and stuff like that. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what your thoughts are. And yeah, definitely check out Joanna and definitely check out the Etsy story. And yeah, see you in the next one. Thank you for listening to the Alex Wolf Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review. And if you aren't already, make sure you're subscribed to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more resources on innovation, economics, and culture, visit alexwolf.co/newsletter and sign up for my email list. Thanks.